Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. As frontline firefighters, always pushing to develop yourself, there's an irony behind the more and more you learn, the further down that rabbit hole you go of development, the more you realise you didn't know to start with. And sometimes it's a case of meeting someone new, going to that course you didn't go on, but sometimes we actually need to remember more than we need to learn. My returning guest on the podcast today is once again Dan Stevens. In October of 24, Dan wrote his inspection of South Wales Fire and Rescue Service to consider the effectiveness of our response to domestic dwelling fires. But the learnings we can take from that document and the ramifications it could have for the wider UK Fire and Rescue Service go way beyond South Wales. Today on the podcast with Dan, we're going to go through in detail so many elements of that inspection report. Dan goes into real detail and highlights some of the challenges faced by modern firefighters in the built environment. We talk about the significance of incident analysis, going through radio messages, initial observations on scene, and the significance of hazard identification in the development of our operational tactics. We touch on legislation, we touch on some old doctrine, we touch on incident command. We pick apart elements of the quadrant model and how underutilised aspects like offensive exterior attack are. We highlight some possible gaps in operational assurance and debriefing in reflecting on our operational tactics and why we chose them. We talk about the differences in volume and pressure, we go into hoses, we go into the different diameters, we go into frictional loss, we go into the different choices of branches and how we use them on the incident ground. We identify the somewhat discrepancy between what's being taught in training schools and what we learn ourselves, and then what we're actually doing when we get to the incident ground. This document, which you can find in the links for the podcast, originally started life as just an inspection report, but it really does have the potential to put its finger on the pulse of what a lot of us are feeling is a gap between what we're learning in training schools and what we're doing out there on the job. We also tip the hat and go into some detail about international practice. Why are they doing things differently? What are the advantages and the disadvantages, the pros and the cons? And what can we adopt and learn from while still appreciating the unique hazards that we face in our built environment in the UK? This is probably the third time that Dan's been on the podcast, and I absolutely love having him on. Dan is not the utopia. Dan is not the god of all fire knowledge by any stretch of the imagination. But what I do love about Dan is his relentless student mindset. He's always willing to raise his hand, to learn more, to get into the detail, and to get himself onto the stations, having the conversations, looking at the IRS reports and speaking to the incident commanders, going through their decision making, going through their operational tactics, going through the thought process as to why they did what they did. This is not about pointing fingers, but it is about recognizing we could be doing better, we could be doing different, and opening our minds up to some of the practices that are out there all over the world. So I hope you take a lot away from this one. Be sure to go into the notes for this one because there is a series of documents that you can read along with so you can help follow the narrative and also take some of these ideas back to your training school and look at developing them and implementing them to apply to your service wherever you are. I was so excited to get this episode out there and I know you're going to enjoy it. It is a really detailed, in-depth, but also deployable conversation about the development of firefighting and our operational tactics in the UK Fire and Rescue Service. I'll see you on the other side. So, Dan, I sometimes I feel like saying welcome back, but I don't like saying that because then it makes it feel like a show, and I hate shows. I always love having you on the podcast, though. Like you said before we started recording a minute ago, you've been on a couple of times now. You've had some great feedback from some of the episodes. I've had colossal amounts of feedback, and it's sort of something we were discussing before we started. Some people are Marmite. You know, some people struggle with the honesty and the abruptness and the passion to which I certainly deliver stuff at times, and I think I see some of that in yourself at times. But the context of our conversation today is how this passion has manifested itself into the inspection report that you wrote. So this is something we're going to put a link to in the notes if people want to open that up, and they can feel free to follow along with our conversation. This is the inspection of South Wales Fire and Rescue Service to consider the effectiveness of its response to domestic dwelling fires. This was October 24. Now it's set around the context of South Wales Fire and Rescue Service, but I would ask that when people listen along, they try and zoom out from that siloed perspective, because from your experiences, a vast majority of what we're going to discuss today will have lots of crossover in relation to people, not only in the UK Fire and Rescue Service, but I'm sure a lot of our international listeners will take some learnings from it as well. And as we said before, Ricardo Weaver says hi. We recorded with him last week. Very complimentary of yourself. I think you've got some work coming up with him next year. I love to see those international connections kicking off. And I like to say that purely to give people insight that work is being done. Work is always being done. People think people sat in their ivory towers not cracking on, but you're one of the romantics that's always doing it. So give people some context around why this report was written.
So the the genesis of the report, Pete, was the discussions that I'd had with the commissioners who'd been put into South Wales Fire and Rescue Service by Welsh ministers to take over the governance. And they quite rightly were asking questions around the inspection regime within Wales, which differs from the inspection regime in England, for entirely understandable reasons. There's only 3 fire and rescue services in Wales. Fire has devolved, whereas in England the inspectorate doesn't just deal with the 44 English fire and rescue services, but they also have responsibility for the 43 police services. So it's a much far bigger entity for entirely understandable reasons.
Do you think that gives them the ability to go into more granular detail? Because I want to just not skip over that. What do you mean it's devolved in Wales? What does that mean for people?
Sorry, what that means is that the responsibility for the fire and rescue service in Wales rests with the Welsh government.
Okay.
So it falls under the devolved competence, if you like. So part of the devolution arrangements within the United Kingdom, the 4 nations are each responsible for certain, I suppose, policy areas you would describe that. So the majority of public functions in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland are the responsibility of the devolved administrations. So there are only a relatively small number of matters which still rest with the UK government. So things like defence, security, for example. So the military is the United Kingdom military. It's not the English military. It's not the Welsh military. But in the Fire and Rescue Service, it is the Welsh Fire and Rescue. It's the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. It's the Northern Irish Fire and Rescue Service. And then in England, then clearly the English Fire and Rescue Service. They are inspected by HMIC FRS. Policing is not devolved in Wales. So the inspectorate for policing is for England and Wales. So there is no comparative equivalent in policing terms to the role I undertake.
Does that cross over into the funding of them as well then?
Yes.
This episode is brought to you in partnership with Godiva Limited. Godiva is one of the world's leading providers of specialist equipment for emergency services market. Renowned for innovation, quality and reliability, Godiva produces a comprehensive range of fire pumps, including vehicle-mounted, portable, and their cutting-edge integrated total water flow control system, SAMFlows. I've been using Godiva my entire career as a reliable pump on the fire ground. It is such a crucial element of a successful firefighting team that you want to empower your crews with the very best, reliable, quality product. Reach out to our partners by checking the notes in the podcast. Now back to the show. Because I like what Scotland did. There's lots of things they don't do well, I'm sure. But I like what they did in terms of combining their 4 services. I was speaking to somebody recently about a super service analogy whereby like you get regional... I mean, everyone knows about regional controls that were tried a little while ago, but if you get 4 or 5 services, and I think it's a great development opportunity, sorry to go into this rabbit hole, but like if you were an aspiring station manager, we could second you to the neighbouring service for a year as part of your development. Because if you're waiting for a station manager role in your service, you might be waiting a long time and it might never come. And also that will just perpetuate that siloed thinking that's within that service. So I like the autonomy that Wales and Scotland have got. I'm sure there's some downsides to it, but...
Yeah, I guess what I would say on that point, Pete, and appreciate it probably is taken us maybe away from the substantive discussion point, but...
Sorry, I've done it straight away, I'm terrible.
I think the what you're talking about there is no reason that those things can't happen now.
Just political appetite?
Well, just appetite, period. You know,
because you get rid of 3 chiefs if you went for a... full service approach.
I mean, in terms, sorry, what I meant was there is no reason why that station managers couldn't be or watch managers with the appropriate qualification and having demonstrated the requisite potential at point of entry couldn't spend a period of time seconded, in a neighbouring service. There's no reason that couldn't happen now. It wouldn't take the combination of a number of services necessarily for that to happen as has happened in Scotland. I guess that's the point I'm making. None of these things would be insurmountable. It would all come down to appetite. Clearly, the combination of services, as was the case in Scotland, ultimately that they are political decisions taken for whatever reasons they are taken for. So
take us back out of the rabbit hole. So this was written for the Welsh government, for the Welsh Fire and Rescue Services.
So yeah, the commissioners had, I think, were very interested in getting a sense of how well was the service performing operationally, because I'd undertaken several previous inspections where I'd highlighted areas of concern. And I guess the point I would make is probably because I simply don't have the capacity to undertake the breadth of inspection that HMI CFRS would take, what I can actually do is to focus in to more thematic areas, and I can go into a far greater level of detail. But we're not talking a mile wide, inch deep. We're talking an inch wide and a mile deep. If that's
so the HMI in the UK, they inspect on effectiveness, efficiency, and people, I think, don't they?
People, yeah. It's essentially the PEEL principles, which is police efficiency, effectiveness. So people efficiency, effectiveness, legitimacy is the PEEL.
Okay.
But only people efficiency and effectiveness would apply in the fire context. So that's that is the basis of the English inspection regime.
So when we're talking about responding to domestic dwelling fires, we're talking predominantly about our effectiveness, would I say? Effectiveness at doing the thing we say we're experts in?
And I guess that's what I was looking at, almost the so what question.
Okay.
So you're responding to dwelling fires. Are you any good?
Yeah. You went and eventually it went out.
Because actually, as you'll appreciate, the public are probably not a particularly good judge of whether we're any good or we're not, really, are they?
No.
Because why would
they have no idea what good looks like.
Well, exactly.
As long as it goes out eventually, we think you've made a good effort.
That's right. And in their moments of crisis, I think they're just very relieved that somebody's turned up to intervene. So
yeah. They've not got options to decide on which service they're going to ring. It's not like the Braidwood times where you used to be able to pick a different insurer. No.
There is something of a monopoly in that space, isn't there? So
yeah, until the private services come in. Unless we really get good at it, the private ones will come in.
Well, who knows where that might end up? But as it stands, it is, as you say, there's not a great deal of choice. So what I was looking at was, okay, so given issues I'd raised previously, concerns that I'd highlighted, so what does this actually look like at the sharp end? So how effective is the service at making responses? Mm-hmm. Now, last year, so in 2023, I'd undertaken some fairly rudimentary analysis of incident data, which gave me sufficient cause for concern, particularly in relation to the data set where fires had gone beyond the room of origin. But when I looked at the firefighting media that had been deployed, on every single occasion, the high-pressure hose reel would feature. There was occasions when you'd get main branches as well, but as well as I do, it's unlikely you're going to deploy a hose reel after you deploy the main branch. In all likelihood, the hose reel's going first. And I suppose the concern I had is that these are fires which have spread beyond the room of origin. So therefore, by definition, that's a post-flashover fire, which would have a potentially quite a substantial heat release rate, which would be well beyond the capacity of a 19mm hose reel, flowing at best 110 litres a minute of water. But actually, I don't believe that our hose reels are flowing 110 litres at the branch. I just don't believe that, because it might be 25 bar pressure at the pump. I'm almost certain it's not that at the branch. You know what I mean? So let's be clear, with 3 lengths of 20 metre, the frictional loss and so forth, it is unlikely to be that at the branch, and therefore the flows are not going to be, which therefore exacerbates the situation further. And that, coupled with the concerns that the long-held concerns I've had over the partial adoption of the Rossander and Gisselson method, what I consider to be very limited understanding of the modern fire environment in relation to the sort of heat release rates you get from modern building materials, the effects of insulation and the drive to keep heat in within houses, the fact that modern building materials will generate higher heat release rates, but they'll consume twice the amount of oxygen, so you're going to end up with ventilation limited fires more quickly, much more often. And that's a really dangerous combination. And if we look at, pretty much every firefighter fatality in a structure fire in the UK in the last 30 years is as a result usually of the combination of uncontrolled ventilation and inappropriate firefighting tactics. And that's a big concern of mine, and having, that I immerse myself fully in research, but equally,
I do. Yeah.
Fatal fire reports, I'm all over them, because for me, if there is to be some good to come out of the death of one of our colleagues, then we owe it to them to draw every single bit of learning out of that we can.
I think that's the bit that often gets missed, isn't it? Because that is the so what bit. And when you try and introduce that in that framework, it sounds to some people enormously disrespectful. We say, today, Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service, Dan Stevens, firefighter of 27 years, died at this, and this. Love goes to his family and all that sort of stuff. And then there's a 6-month investigation, and then we go, so what? So what are we going to do about it? Are we just going to go, well, we encourage you to get support from the Firefighters charity and blah, 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 and we're going to send some fire engines to the funeral. What are we going to do about it? What did we do wrong? And that's it's the difference between apportioning blame, because you can dissipate that. No, it's not about blame, it's about responsibility, isn't it? It's not about whose fault it is, it's about whose job is it to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Look, that's the thing, Pete. We are obligated, for as long as I'm in this space, for as long as I'm in this sector, I will do everything I can to reduce the likelihood of firefighters getting injured or worse in incidents. And I make no apology for that, and nor will I ever.
So just to do a direct pull from this executive summary to summarise what we've just been talking about. So the purpose of the inspection was to assess the operational effectiveness of the service when responding to domestic fire incidents. The incident type selected, as you've said, for analysis was dwelling fires where the fire and heat damage was recorded beyond the room within which the fire had started, i.e. the room of origin. These incidents present significant risk to firefighters, trapped occupants and dwelling itself. Obviously to the firefighters, because we've said that room's already gone into flashover. It's now looking to spread to the rest of the building. You did do a large sample, so a total of 252 incidents between May of 2021 and March of 23. And that's not total incidents. These are incidents where it is a dwelling fire that's gone beyond the room of origin. So there was obviously far more incidents, but you have narrowed it down to this type to make sure we get a sort of reliable data set. Modern buildings are designed to be energy efficient. That's the whole conversation about fire has changed. People, fire hasn't changed. Well, it has, because the stuff's on fire has changed, therefore fire's changed. And the ventilation profile has changed and the energy efficiency of the building has changed. So they're energy efficient, they keep heat in. Modern buildings' contents are typically synthetic based, which burn with a much greater intensity and consume twice as much oxygen than traditional materials. This can be an extremely dangerous combination for firefighters, and the most effective tactics are not employed. Given the weight of the evidence available to us, we consider the operational tactics employed by the service at a substantial number of incidents have placed firefighters at unnecessary risk and or resulted in avoidable damage to properties. That's always a big provocative one for me. The avoidable damage to properties, because that is somebody's home, or that is somebody's business, or that is somebody's hotel, and that employs 300 people, and their families are not going to get Christmas presents, and then maybe that will cause domestic violence in the home, and that will be the trigger to set off this already delicately balanced, family relationship that's going on in there. And and then all those people aren't going to local shops to spend their money because they're not earning any money, or whatever. So this has serious concerns about the adverse safety events that can result from this, that they're not being recognised, let alone being reported. The reasons for our concerns are explained in detail within the report. So there's a bunch more of the executive summary. People can follow along and read, but I just wanted to insert that bit in there, and I'll hand back over to yourself.
Yeah, look, I realise that those findings don't make for good reading, Pete. I understand that, but in the end, I can only make a judgment based on evidence. And the evidence, I would suggest, is overwhelming. And in fairness, there are a number of stakeholders that have an interest in the outcomes of this report. And in fairness, all of the key stakeholders have acknowledged, that, the evidence is the evidence. And yes, we can't really argue with that. So, and it would appear that there is a willingness to act on this, which that clearly is a good thing. That's a positive thing. So, in that sense, I've made recommendations at the end of the report. The recommendations are intended to drive an improvement in the current situation, and I believe that if they are acted upon, then it will make a positive difference.
So a lot of this data was drawn from IRS, which for international listeners is our instant recording system. This is UK FRS wide, isn't it? So Welsh and Scottish all feed into the same IRS as well, I'm guessing?
Yeah, absolutely. The IRS, as you say, is a UK wide system, and it is replicated to a greater or lesser extent throughout the world. There are some limitations with it, Pete.
I was going to say, do you think it goes into enough granularity? Because it has to be a big sheep dip, do you think, and we're not going to throw stones at the people that put it together, everything can always be better, but I often read through IRS reports and I still want to speak to the person because I don't feel like I've got enough detail.
Look, I think I use the IRS as the starting point, as the first point of reference. What I did thereafter was through access to the mobilising system, I went through, and it was 350 incidents. I distilled it down to 252 because there was 100 that there was actually 50 for the purposes of the analysis. There was another 50. I was able to distill it down just using the IRS search parameters. But I went through every single incident log from the mobilising system. Now that took a long time, Pete. That probably took me about 70 hours to do that. I went through line by line every single transaction that related to that incident, because there is a wealth of evidence there. As an example, what did the first caller state? Often that will be recorded on the log. Did they state? Ordinarily, the fire control operator, the firefighter control, who's created that entry into the log, would use terms like caller state smoke issuing. Now, I'm not sure the caller actually did say that, because that's a fire and rescue service term. What he probably said is there's smoke coming out the window or something of that nature. Yeah. But the point being is there's a lot of cues in there that give an indication as to what type of fire that could be. So if you think about your BSAF indicators, smoke, air, heat, flame, smoke, what does that tell us? Well, what type of smoke is it? Because sometimes what they'd say is there's thick black smoke coming out of and that's just the first caller. What you often get is the first attending appliance. The OIC will then send a message, an initial message, not an informative. They're not declaring a tactical mode. They'll send a message to words to the effect of either smoke issuing or well alight. Now, straight away from them, I can draw some inferences from that. Because I did triangulate with fire investigation reports where they were available. I'll speak about that probably as we go through the conversation. But I go back to smoke issuing. If that's thick black smoke, if it's turbulent smoke, that is a ventilation limited fire. That is a fire that in all likelihood may well still be in the room of origin. It just simply doesn't have the oxygen, because what I do in the report, some of it reads like a mini science lesson, which typically an inspection report probably wouldn't, but I thought it was important to set context for the reader. And some of it reads like a history lesson because it explains why that we've got to where we've got to, and we can maybe unpack a bit of that. But fundamentally, going back to the information that I was extracting out of the incident logs. So one of the important things was, what does the OIC, particularly the OIC, because that says what they're faced with when they arrive, what do they say? And typically it's either smoke issuing or it's well alight. So smoke issuing, unless it's, light smoke, which would indicate a fuel-controlled fire, or a fire that's out on arrival, possibly. But typically, if they say, and it won't be that because these are incidents where the fire's gone beyond the room of origin, so I already know, I'd already know what the outcome is. I'm sort of started working back from, so what did it look like when we got there at the point of intervention? What did it look like when it was actually then within our gift to do something about it, which speaks then to the effectiveness of what we did or didn't do thereafter. So the smoke issuing bit, typically ventilation controlled fire. Well alight, typically post flashover.
Means visible flame issuing from the building.
Absolutely, they're saying it's well alight. Well, you've got visible flame, so clearly it might still be ventilation limited. It might not be the most efficient combustion, but it's quite simplistic. But essentially, you think, well, in either circumstance, on every single occasion, the first informative is still 2BA hose reel or 4BA2 hose reel, depending on the lag time of sending the informative. Because often there was the informatives weren't getting sent till maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes in. By which time there probably is a second fire engine there. But what I'm able to reasonably assume is, unless they both arrived together, which was very unlikely that happened, that wasn't the norm. There was some occasions when it happened, but that was infrequent.
Especially in Wales, it's less densely populated, so stations aren't necessarily as close.
In the city areas, you sort of in your Cardiff and your Newport, you'd get them fairly close together. But typically, as you say, what you'd often see is a 5-minute delay because you'd have the whole time pump, and then the RDS pump would be the next attendant appliance.
Retained duty system that's on call for the international people.
System on call, apologies. So typically the first tactical option employed is offensive interior attack using a 19mm hose reel. And that's a fact, because that's what the log says. That's not me making it up. That is what the log says. They're always making reference, almost always, to this safety jet. But when the rules around the safety jet are which would be 45mm low pressure high flow, And I'm not saying they haven't run a safety jet out, but if you look at the rules around that it should be of equal length, or at least the same length as the attack line, which means your attack
If you're
line
going to call it a
60
safety
metres.
jet, yeah. Some people call it a safety jet, some people call it a covering jet. And there's a difference. And
Yeah,
I
I
don't
think
think we should encourage people to even say covering jet, because I don't think that's appropriate.
No, I think the terminology always used here is the safety jet. The point I'm making is it's not getting used. What's getting used is the hose reel, 19 mil, 100 litres a minute hose reel, and the first so no door control, no consideration of an offensive exterior attack. It's just it is a default tactic of an offensive interior.
Yeah.
They're the most hazardous tactical option, using the least protection available to firefighters.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together. So let's pause there and say, are those 2 visible reads from the external? We've got an underventilated fire issuing heavy black smoke, turbulent smoke, versus a visible flame ventilated fire. So if we've got a visible flame ventilated fire and we've got 2 options for media outside, relating to that Ricardo quadrant model, and it's not his model, but it's, what would you suggest is an early miss that we've not considered there?
Well, what I would say first of all is the offensive interior attack, to use the quadrant model, is the final option in the quadrant because it's recognised as the most hazardous to firefighters. If you think about where the 4-quadrant model came from, when Ricardo and his colleagues developed that, it was off the back of the DuPont boatyard fire where the 3 firefighters were killed in Holland at a fire in a boatyard with no persons reported. And it would have been 4 firefighters, but for the fact that the 4th firefighter in the team, the hose reel snagged on a boat trailer, and that 4th firefighter came out to release the reel when the fire gas ignition occurred, which kills 3 of his colleagues. Had he not have done that, had that not have happened, then that would have been 4 firefighters killed. But the point
Imagine
is,
the survivor guilt for that individual.
And look, these are, these are just, that's fate, isn't it? These things happen. Now, what the Dutch did from that, absolute credit to them and to Ricardo, particularly, who I've known Ricardo for a long time. I knew Ricardo when he was the deputy chief in Amsterdam. We'd done collaborative work with him many years ago. So absolutely top class guy, very, very knowledgeable, as you can see, and they developed this 4-quadrant model. But the 4th quadrant, the offensive interior attack, is the final option. It's not your first option, it's your last option, because it is the most hazardous. So, to answer your question, you're turning up to, whether it's smoke issuing, whether it's well alight. If it's smoke issuing, then clearly, if you think about some of the Dutch guidance that was produced alongside of the 4-quadrant model, so the 2018 publication, The Renewed View of Firefighting, where essentially Ricardo is the author of that, and he sets out a set of principles. And the second principle is, in simplistic terms, you've got more time than you think. Because what Ricardo is saying, what the Dutch research was showing, and it's supported by the ULFSRI, the American research, is that for all of the reasons we've highlighted previously, more likely than not, the fire will be ventilation controlled. It will have the oxygen content in the compartment will have dropped below 16%. And therefore you will not have flame and combustion.
It's suffocating it, yeah.
Simply because it has consumed the available oxygen. Which means
that's where back in Braidwood's readings, like if I think you say to police officers, if there's smoke issuing from a property, what we want you to do before we get there is run round and close all the doors and windows.
Absolutely.
That's what you used to say to police officers.
Yeah, as counterintuitive as it might sound, which is a anti-ventilation is a control measure tactic. Even if you look at the American the ventilate, enter, isolate, search, VIS. The ventilation is the act of going in through the window, but immediately followed by isolation, which means shut the thing behind you. Which is what Braidwood was teaching back in the day, when it was, Braidwood's quote, the fire grows in direct proportion to the oxygen supplied to it. Yeah. And as counterintuitive as it may seem, closing doors and closing down, people get hung up on backdraft, as a backdraft is a momentary event. Which is only going to occur, if you've had very high sort of heat release rates where pyrolysis continues once the oxygen is depleted. It's a
and equally that will be
thing.
Mitigated by something you're already teaching the crews, which is correct door assessment.
And look,
so if they closed it down, it's only going to, there's people at the National BA Challenge which actually scored more points. If the BA team, they get straight off, they run up, they close the door. And then the instant commander finishes their 360. There was points available for that. And because it's a good move.
Why would you not do that? You know what I mean? I go back to the fire grows in direct proportion to the oxygen, so shut the door. Going back to the tactical options available to you with the heavy smoke issue, then you've got more time than you think. Ricardo's principle. Use that time to do your 360. The advent of clean cabs creates now an opportunity where BA Team Alpha 1 will have to don on arrival.
Outside of the cab.
They're not going to be donning en route anymore because the sets aren't in the cabs sometimes, they're not, so it's a clean cab. Whatever people might think of that, and I understand it's not universally popular, but for me, anything that reduces firefighter exposure to contaminants has got to be a good thing.
And also, just do some muscle memory drills and get quicker at putting your set on. Because some people, it's painful to watch.
But come back to, Pete, the science, right?
Yeah.
You've got more time than you think.
Yeah.
If it's ventilation controlled, then the reality is that if there is survivable space in that building, a couple of extra minutes isn't going to make too much difference. Actually, you can make it worse by making the wrong decision. Like, survivability is contingent on 3 fundamental aspects: proximity to the fire, elevation, number of closed doors. So if you are not in the room of origin, if you are down on the floor, and if there's closed doors between you and the fire, all things being equal, you've got a good chance of surviving there.
You've got time.
Even if, on the outside, that fire is vented and it looks like, the whole ground floor might be alight, let's say.
Yeah.
But if you're in an upstairs bedroom, the door's closed, you're on the floor, there's still potential survivability. So the crew, the first attending crew taking that little bit more time, that's not a bad thing. The OIC, do the 360, do the thermal scan, take your glove off, put your hand on the back of a window, whatever. If the cues are not there evidently,
Yeah.
even if you can't see any smoke issuing, there are a number of things you can do, on that size up. But in this scenario, we've got smoke issuing.
Mm-hmm.
So your first option in those circumstances, I would suggest, is the offensive exterior attack. Controlling the ventilation as much as you possibly can. But if you can get water into that compartment, you can do nothing other than minimum. That's only going to be positive. That will only.
It's only going to make it better. Yeah.
Yeah, that can only, because all the research shows, get water onto the fire as quick as you can. And if you look at the ULFSRI near-miss studies on their training portal, there's a couple of them up there now. So the NIST look after the line of duty deaths, but ULFSRI have done some really good near-miss case studies. On both occasions from the training packages that are up on the portal, it's external, fire venting externally, but they make an offensive interior attack. They make no attempt to control, they make no, what the Americans would call the transitional attack. They make no attempt to attack it from the outside. And on both occasions, the interior attack, the firefighters come up against a layout, a building layout that they're not anticipating, because they don't know what the route to the fire is. Internally, they know what it is externally because they can see it, the flames are issuing. They don't control the door, which creates further issues for them, because then there's further oxygen creating flow paths within the...
And it's going to get there before you are.
Well, you've said before, one of your frustrations is the amount of time it takes. And I'm going to come on to. I think let's come back to that point a little later, maybe.
Can you just speak to transitional exterior attack? Because I think a big excuse people have made in the past, and I apologise if you're going to come to this, is you're pushing lots of air entrainment, poaching the crews. Talk to me a little bit about straight stream versus cone in, because again, we don't want to get too far into the granular, but I don't want people to dismiss the option we've just said because they're thinking of that.
Yeah, so the way in which you would execute the offensive exterior attack is flow through low pressure, high flow, straight stream, steep angle.
Bounce it off the ceilings and the walls.
Keep the branch as static as you possibly can. That will entrain a minimal amount of air. It's the opposite of hydraulic ventilation, which you'd hope firefighters would understand what that was.
Yeah.
Directed at a steep angle onto the ceiling, and essentially then that will spread out. If you direct the straight stream against the wall, the stream disperses widely in a circular pattern, I guess. So it's almost achieving the same thing, albeit from...
For new recruits that are unfamiliar with hydraulic ventilation, it's something they might get taught, because they might not get taught offensive exterior because of what they might learn in hydraulic ventilation. So hydraulic ventilation, very quickly, you're standing in a compartment, room of origin, heavy smoke logging, and you're going to use a 30-degree cone to encompass as much of an open window as you can. You're going to push it out the window, and around that, because it's high pressure, and it will be entraining air, and it will push a lot of pressure. People think if you do that in reverse, it's going to push air into it. Yeah. People think if they do it from the other side, I must be pushing all the air into it. But the difference is you would never do a straight stream for hydraulic ventilation, because you wouldn't achieve anything.
Or
so if you do it from the exterior,
stream, you'd do it on an O pattern, and you'd move it very quickly, which then would create a... But again, there are rigs that you can train for all of this stuff on. What I would say is, Pete, and I'm jumping around a little bit, when I did the field...
That's my fault.
When I was doing the station visits, and I was speaking to the crews about, like, talk me through, the last working job, talk me through, what did you do? And often they were saying, we did an offensive exit, we did hit it from the outside.
Nice.
And I don't doubt they did. It didn't show that on the incident log, and I did make the point, if it's not on the log, it didn't happen. It might have happened, but then you've got to prove it happened. If it's on the log, then it happened.
Yeah.
As basic as that might sound. But so I think they probably have tried an offensive exterior, or what they consider to be that. I think they've probably used a high pressure hose reel, so the flow will have been very limited. I doubt they've put it in on a steep angle. I doubt they've tried to achieve water mapping. So they may well have done it, but it will have had limited effect because
I think the driver's done it with the hose reel whilst they're waiting.
Yeah.
Maybe for a little bit.
Yeah. But I think they'll have done it, in a way which is not the way, say, Keats Gates would demonstrate. Keats Gates is probably the main nozzle guy from... I'm sure there are many quality nozzle firefighters in America, but Keith is he's the guy for ULFSRI that tends to demonstrate these things. So I think a lot of it comes down to technique and training in that particular control measure tactic, which I just do not think is getting done anything like enough, if at all. So firefighters might be doing that. I just don't think they're doing it effectively. But that'd be your first tactical option, I think, would be that offensive exterior attack. Now, it may be that that's not achievable. It might be a terrace and the fire might be at the rear. And it might
I think people are worried about wasting water as well, or what they might perceive as not securing water yet.
Well, look, and again, we're jumping around a bit, but I got that played back to me. So, the water supplies are very poor. To which my response is, well, the water supplies you'll find are poor everywhere. That's not unique to South Wales. The water supplies weren't great in Liverpool either. But, you've got either 1,800 litres or 2,400 litres in your tank. ULFSRI research shows that with their offensive exterior attacks, their transitional attacks, they're flowing, say, 200 gallon, about 900 litres. They were effectively achieving suppression. Not final extinguishment. You'd still have to go in offensive interior and extinguish. But fundamentally, for maybe a 10, 15 megawatt fire, they were suppressing that, with the correct nozzle technique.
Yeah.
Exterior attack. I mean, you only need look at some of the temperature reductions from, say, 1,000 degrees down to
Massive.
200 at the ceiling, probably down to 40 or 50 degrees at the floor, putting it well within sort of survivable ranges at that point. So, 100% offensive exterior, definitely. I'm not saying there's a default here, but if you were going to default, then that's what you default to. Because, of course, if it makes it better for firefighters, it's going to make it better for someone who's trapped in there, isn't it? And if you think about the contaminant issue, if you've substantially reduced the intensity of that fire, that's not to say you've fully reduced the contaminant risk. You won't have done, but you'll have reduced it. You won't have eradicated it, but you'll have reduced it. It's clear it's got to be a good thing as well. But then if you are having to make an offensive interior attack, then I think I'm right in saying, I think all the fire engines there now carry smoke curtains. I'm like, get a smoke curtain up on the front door. Or the point at which you're going to go in, just put a smoke curtain up. You're back into the Rasander and Gisselson space there with the third person controlling the door. If you've got a ventilation limited fire in there, keep it that way.
Yeah.
If you're going to go in, and you might have to, control the door. Anti-ventilation. So if you are going to go in, I wouldn't be going in with a 19mm hose reel, I'd be going in with a main jet. Because I'm not going to take a knife to a gunfight, you know what I mean? I want the best possible flow. Because if it does start, if it does deteriorate, then I want the best possible means of defence, or offensive attack sort of thing. So that's sort of what I was sort of driving at with some of this. But if you flip it to like where it's well alight, which often, they were saying, ground floor, well alight, living room, whatever it may be. But they're still going in with a 19mm hose reel, offensive interior. And the first challenge would have to be, how did you think you were going to suppress, you've heard me say it before, how do you think you're going to suppress that? What a 5-10 megawatt heat release rate fire with a 19mm hose reel? What are you thinking? You can't possibly think you're going to suppress that. You might, but it would take you a long time. This is your Paul
So
Gimlet
that's the argument.
minimum
So
flow
people will
rate.
say, Dan, I've done it though. I've seen it. I've done it. I've got crews to do it many, many times. Yeah, but you don't appreciate the costs that it's taken to do that. The time, the level of exposure you put in them firefighters to, the residual damage to the rest of the building, the spread beyond the room of origin, the speed and efficiency and effectiveness, to come back to, the report and the inspection's purpose. You're not being efficient and effective.
No, and that's my point. It's. But if you hit that thing with a 45 or a 52 mil, whatever you float, then you're knocking that down much more quickly. Much more quickly. Your firefighters are getting exposed to less thermal insult. But the thing, Pete, the thing really that really, really concerned me is when I started to work through, I'm doing my due diligence. I've gone through the logs, every one of them, 70 hours worth of detail, going through, drawing out the detail. I've got a good picture now, and I highlight a number of them. I'm like, have you got any fire investigation reports available for me? Not because I particularly want to see the cause and origin. Origin is useful, clearly. The cause is academic at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see the pictures, because the pictures don't lie.
Yeah.
The pictures don't lie. And what the pictures show you, Pete, really in graphic detail, is flow path. They show you, that's a bidirectional flow. Or, that's a unidirectional, that's an outlet vent. You know what I mean? Because you just can't argue with that, because there is fire damage through the totality of that aperture. There's evidence of pyrolysis through and you think, have they gone in that way? Honestly, Pete, there were a number of occasions where I'm like, now I've got the pictures and I can start mapping the thing together with the timeline on the incident log, and you're like, that's a near miss. And it's not even getting recognised. Not even getting recognised as an adverse event, let alone getting reported. And here's the thing, I keep making this point. You get away with it till the day you don't. And it's the Swiss cheese thing, isn't it? And I'm seeing all these near misses and I'm thinking, you got away with it there.
MSA are supporting us on today's podcast, and I chose to partner with them because I've been wearing this stuff for nearly 20 years, and they are the global leader in development, manufacture and supply of incredible, safe products that really protect people, not just our communities out there, but also first responders, most importantly, all over the world. Get yourself over to MSA and have a look at it. The high performance protective clothing for emergency services responders. They also partner with us on the UK Pink Firefighters. That's because we love them. The helmets with the reflective visor, the F1XF, absolutely epic helmet. And not forgetting how they improve firefighter safety through their connectivity in the connected firefighter platform. That incorporates the M1S CBA, which is the tried and tested BA set. Everybody uses it in the UK Fire and Rescue Service. Then they combine that with the Luna module, which is a wireless all-in-one device, creating an independent search and rescue network, providing edge detection, enhanced personal thermal imaging, while simplifying post-scene reporting and data retention. Honestly, the edge detection element of it, go and check it out. Honestly, go and have a look on their website. Edge detection, it looks like the Matrix. It's absolutely awesome. In terms of an enhancement tool for search and rescue, it's literally unrivaled. MSA are always pushing the envelope, and it's a real privilege to be able to continue to grow our partnership together. So whether it's your PPE, your bunker gear, your helmets, your SCBA, your thermal imaging, your Luna, or your portable gas detection, both of us know that this equipment needs to work. It needs to be high quality, reliable, and dependable in the moment. And that's why I use MSA, because they know what's at stake. So talk to me about the dangers of bidirectional versus unidirectional, and maybe basements is a nice example for this, because it's something that's provocative sometimes for bidirectional flow paths and heat intensity and stuff like that. Because when you're talking about the burn around an aperture, and I apologise for dragging you into some of this detail, but I don't want to lose people that are unfamiliar with those terms.
So I guess if I make these, just fair point. So just what I saw often was pictures of front doors which had evident heat damage on the rear and substantial fire damage on the front, which tells you that At the point at which that door was opened, the fire was ventilation limited because, yes, there might have been some heat damage, a bit of smoke staining on the inside of the door, but then it gets opened. The fire really takes hold because it never gets shut again. And then there's a load of fire damage on the front of the door because that can only be caused because the door is closed when they get there. That can only be caused after they've got there, which means and that's the way they've gone in. Then that's just the facts are the facts. That is, the evidence is the evidence. They've gone in. It's evidently a bidirectional flow, but it's flashed over after they've gone in, not before.
Yeah.
And it's flashed over while they're in there. And because, ironically, because it's taken them so long to actually get to actually close in on that's probably saved them in this instance. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, and I know I'm jumping about a bit here, but one of the questions I asked on the second inspection, I did a follow-up inspection at Mid and West Wales Fire. So I was able to refine slightly because of what I'd sort of explored through the South Wales inspection. What I started asking firefighters was, the BA teams, BA Team Alpha 1, what did you actually do when you went in? Did you flow and move? Did you flow, shut down and move? Did you pulse? Did you do anything? Did you use your tick? And the first thing that come back was that a lot of the firefighters were saying, actually, can't remember the last working job. And if you look at the report analysis, what it shows is that around 60% of the overall total number of recorded dwelling fires don't result in any firefighting action. So actually, it's a relatively small number of incidents divided across quite a large number of firefighters. The exposure is actually very low. So firefighters are not getting exposed regularly to these sort of incidents. So I'm asking them, what did you do? Because I'm thinking, I know what you're trained to do. I've seen what you're being trained to do. Are you actually doing that? And overwhelmingly, Pete, the answer was no, they weren't. Now, for the most part, they were getting taught to do your 3 pulses. So essentially flow, shut down, or pulse, shut down and move rather than flow. Because they're not ever trained on a straight stream, an arc method. But I couldn't say definitively there was any default to what firefighters actually did when they went on the interior progression. But what I can say is they weren't doing what they were trained to do. Which suggests to me, well, the operational assurance processes are clearly failing because they're not even asking those questions.
Yeah. But
it's like, so how effective then is the training if you're not even doing what it is you're getting trained? Effective or otherwise, right or wrong, but you're not doing it anyway. What are you actually doing? And what are you doing when you go in? And, a lot of the time I got a sense, and I had a discussion with Louis White over this from Lancashire. He made the point, he was saying that he really finds a challenge with getting people to actually open the branch, as they're progressing. And I get what he's saying, I absolutely get. And when he said it to me, I was like, yeah, I can see what you mean. Straight away, I can see what you mean.
Yeah.
What are they actually doing? When they, even said, right, how are you using your tick? Because actually, in a hierarchy of deployment here, I would suggest use your eyes first. Get down low, which is the complete opposite of the BA shuffle, which drives the likes of Lars mad and people like that. Get down low, and try and use your eyes, and if you can't use your eyes, use your torch. And then use your tick.
I'll also show you a flow path.
Exactly, that's what you're looking for, because you if if it's travelling that way, you need to go that way. If it's coming over your head, you're going in the right direction. You know what I mean? But you ain't going to see that unless you're right down on the floor. You know what I mean?
No.
Which then makes it quite hard to start, shuffle along on your knees and pulse. You know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
even for that matter, do flow and move. But at least if you're doing flow and move, you are absolutely managing the hazard when you do it in a proper way. Not you might or might not be diluting the fire gases. If you pulse, because it might or might not be effective. But at least with the straight stream, you as long as you direct it in the
Yeah.
in the direction of the heat, you are at least the reach of the stream. If nothing else is gonna, you would think all things being equal, is going to put water at least in the vicinity of the of the fire. So that was quite an interesting discussion with people around what do you actually do. And I think services need to be a lot cuter now on the ops assurance around unpacking some of that, debriefing it. Not just, it all went well, it was all fantastic, and right, what did you actually do?
But I think there's a massive absence I mean, they don't need to be fire behaviour experts, and I certainly wouldn't pretend to be one myself, but like, in the absence of that contextual training, I don't think they would know the questions to ask. Or even how to guide the conversation.
I agree, Peter. But we're having these conversations now, aren't we? In the next inspection report I'm going to be publishing in the next couple of weeks, I start to focus in on a lot of the operational assurance stuff. And I make some recommendations there, which I'll share with you now, because I think that...
Because you can't say that the person's doing it wrong if that's the way you've trained them, and if they are or are not aligning to the training, but equally you're not even checking it properly. So, you've got to take on a bit of responsibility and accountability here.
And here's the thing, isn't it? So, you've heard me say this ad nauseum, HSG 65... Guide to Successful Health and Safety Management. Use the long version rather than the new Plan Do Check Act policy. What is your doctrine? What is your operational risk assessment? What's your hazard knowledge? What are your control measure tactics? Are they based on sound evidence?
Yeah.
Because if you look in that South Wales report, I systematically dismantle the SOPs where I'm like, hazard, that's not even a hazard, using certain example, that's not even a hazard, the key control measures, there's not a single control measure in that section, it's like, when you start to just deconstruct these things line by line, it's like, well, that's the guidance that we're giving to people. Why do we expect that? Why should we be surprised that this needs a fundamental reset? Now, the publication of the firefighting guide, the foundation guidance, and the new firefighting national operational guidance is a step in the right direction. I think there are still areas of concern I have within that, but they're rightly or wrongly, we're on a journey there, that at least there's a dialogue there. There's a lot of good people at the national level who are across this, people like John Roberts, Dave Russell, people like that, who are absolutely cognizant of this stuff and and are absolutely looking to grip this. So I've got real confidence in all of those people. I think the direction of travel is definitely where it needs to be in that
definitely
sense.
Positive, yeah.
But if your doctrine isn't right, then what possible chance is even your training going to be right, and then even your ops assurance, because that's why I focus big on ops assurance, because that's the so what thing, isn't it? That's your quality assurance mechanism. What or like WM7, AFSM2, the even National Occupational Standards, they're very broad. So what does it actually mean? this alignment with our training's aligned with national occupational standards. I'm like, now it needs to be aligned with control measure tactics. It needs to be aligned with your operational risk assessment. It needs to be aligned with hazard knowledge, control measure tactics. That's what the HSE expect through Regulation 3 of the management regs, that you'll have a suitable and sufficient risk assessment. I don't think they're that bothered about national occupational standards or role maps. I think what they're more concerned about, have you got a risk assessment? Is it suitable and sufficient? Is the hazard knowledge? Is it really hazard knowledge? For example, I've seen in operational guidance dry and wet rising mains being described in the hazard section. I'm like, well, they're not a hazard. Them failing is a hazard.
Yeah, I was going to say.
That is not a hazard.
Like the glass box that contains it.
Exactly.
What's a hazard?
Exactly. Like, that's not a hazard. That failing is a hazard. And then there would be control measure tactics that you employ if the thing fails. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because that is a loss of water, which is a hazard. And then there are mitigations, control measure tactics that you can then employ. As one example, just using an example. So, get the guidance right. Get the doctor.
I would say section 2, so this is page 90 and onwards, it's very useful for all fire and rescue services, I would say. Looking back again through it now, there's a number of great references in, because you keep referencing things like Rosander and Gisselson, and it goes into the depth of the terminology and the actual names of these documents and the origins of these documents, if people wish to go and explore them. And many of them are freely available on our platform if people want them for free to find them easily. But people can go and find them themselves. They're all freely available online.
Absolutely. And it is either, what I'm quoting is either typically is the Brandweer Academy, Ricardo Viva's National Dutch Research, or Underwriters Laboratory Fire Safety Research Institute, nationally funded American research. Typically, there is one reference in there to the one of the Swedish publication Enclosure Fires, because I'm mentioning Thornton's rule, which dates back, I think Thornton's rule probably dates back to the turn of last century, but that's the size of the opening directly determines the maximum heat release rate that can be achieved from a fire. So a 1 metre square opening, the maximum heat release rate fire you can achieve if the compartment only has that much oxygen inflow is 2.5 megawatt. And that's a really important thing, I think, for firefighters as a frame of reference, because if the front door is open, potentially you can get up to a 4.5 megawatt heat release rate fire from that. So if you close the front door, then you can't, and that's the thing. You can't.
Or equally, if you can't close it, you put a smoke curtain over it.
Exactly, Pete. Exactly. You control it. And it's a control measure tactic then to deploy your smoke curtain, isn't it? So
100%.
I was having a conversation with Lars Axelson, and we're sort of where we got to, in a very similar conversation to that with Jared Mann, is around, actually, we're not, we're trying to steer away from defaults, but actually there is a relatively small number of control measure tactics here that you really need to master in the structural firefighting space. The 4 quadrants are a good frame of reference, but that's not actually the tactics themselves. That is a generic description of a number of control measure tactics that you might employ within that particular context. But fundamentally, and I'm going to jump around a bit here, but an offensive exterior attack, well, always do that if you can. Why wouldn't you? Because you're going to hit the fire quicker. Always control the door, or always control doors and windows. So always apply that anti-ventilation. And if you're going to do an offensive interior attack, low pressure, high flow, maximise the reach of your stream.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm not saying, I'm not saying that's the panacea, but those three control measure tactics that probably give you the best chance of.
Gives the highest level of safety with the highest likelihood of a positive
Absolutely.
outcome, mitigating the risk and exposure to the firefighters that are committing.
Completely. I was having a conversation with Mike Stachowicz. I think I've pronounced Mike's surname, and I've really tried to get it right for him because I couldn't
No one cares.
pronounce it
Stacco.
correctly the day.
Mikey.
So hopefully, Mike, I hope that's okay for you.
I hope it's wrong. I keep spelling it wrong.
I have some great conversations with Mike, and he challenges. It's fantastic. He challenges, really good, and he challenged me to say, "Why did you go for 52mm hose in Merseyside?" He said, "I can understand why you did it for the high rise. Why didn't you use 38? Because it's easier for hose management." And I'm like,
Yep.
"Yeah, you're right. Right, fair challenge." He said, "There's some practical aspects to that. Well, how much hose would you put on the fire engine? With you've got a limited amount of hose you can carry. So what you'd be putting 70, 38, 52. But you know what? Nothing's insurmountable." It was a fair challenge.
No.
And my response was, probably for the same reason that I went for gas tight suits for hazmat response, because it was the highest level of protection.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, it's a valid shout and it's a valid challenge. And I thought about it afterwards, thinking, why didn't I even think of 30? Why trying to go back and right, why didn't I do that? Because that's a fair challenge. Why didn't I do that?
I don't see 38s anywhere now. I think a lot of places have gone to 45s.
45,
but
yeah.
even like around me, a lot of places it's 52s and 64s.
We had them in Melbourne. 38s was the 45 in Melbourne.
Yeah.
The point I was going to make, so clearly the frictional loss is going to be greater on your 38 than it is on a 45, and clearly then it will be on the 51, 52. But I was thinking about Mike's challenge, and I thought, do you know what? Yes, he's right, and it would for non-high-rise firefighting then,
Mm-hmm.
where frictional loss then may be less of an issue.
Mm-hmm.
You could use 38, but then I thought, if I was going to do that, I'd only use it with a smooth bore.
Yeah.
Because it
So
would
you're reducing the
offset the
frictional
frictional
loss at the
loss.
end. Yeah.
And then, but it's that sort of challenge. That's what your ops assurance should be throwing up, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what.
Have you seen the hose snagger tools that they have in America as well?
The what? Sorry, Pete.
Hose snagger.
Is that for the? Is that for in lieu of sort of hose management teams? Is it?
Yeah. It is beyond a privilege to be able to bring the Firefighters podcast to you, and we are so grateful for every single person that supports, listens, shares, and follows our journey. But here's the honest truth. It takes a colossal amount of time and work to keep the podcast going. And to help us keep doing it, create more, reach more guests internationally, and make the podcast sustainable, we're asking for you to help. And to do this, we've set up a Patreon page. Now, by joining this, you'll not only support the future of the podcast, but also gain access to exclusive benefits. Now, if you've ever wanted to meet a member of the podcast, buy us a beer, buy us a coffee, and you think anything you've ever listened to on the podcast has been worth £3, that's basically what we're asking you for. By joining our Patreon community, you will get access to every single full episode archive we have ever made. Now, hundreds and hundreds of key documents that we've got in there on fire behavior, firefighter health, cancer risks, incident debriefs, and so much more. A growing collection of valuable resources to help you learn and grow. So by joining the Patreon for just £3, you'll unlock everything we've ever created, alongside discounts on merch, your support in whatever way, dropping it in the WhatsApp group, sharing it on the local newsletter, whatever it is. It's incredibly valuable, and we really do support it, and we need it to make it a long-lasting resource, that legacy resource we always talk about for first responders, firefighters, and everybody everywhere who's ever been interested in joining the fire service or who absolutely loves the job. Now, if you're already supporting something, as many people people do. It's totally cool. You can still access the podcast for free, and you'll always be able to access all the new episodes for free. But we're asking for your help to make this sustainable. And if you want to do something free, follow us on our YouTube, subscribe to it, rate us on Spotify, whatever platform you listen to. And we want to keep growing. We want to keep sharing the insights, and we want to keep showcasing the incredible work happening in our community and our sector. So if you feel like you want to join the Patreon crew and help us make this possible, head to patreon.com/TFFPC or check the link in any episode podcast notes. Thank you for supporting us. We'll see you on the other side. It's basically an S-shaped piece of steel that when you put some cross-directional on it, it grips the hose. I see a lot of personal issue with them in the States. I've got one myself. I'm not allowed to use it in my service, obviously. But because we only use 52s and 64s, this really discourages anybody from going internal with a 52 because it's so goddamn heavy and immovable. So I think if you're gonna force them to use 52s, give them a tool to help with their correct manual handling. But I would much prefer. I'd probably have 4 lengths of 45 personally, if I had to make my own fire engine. But I would probably say that because I can manage a 45 quite nicely. I'd have 4 of them, and then I'd probably have 6 lengths of 70 for my feeds in.
What sort of branches would you go for?
Oh, God, great question. I've always been a big fan of AWG or Acron. I like the articulating branch for internal firefighting. So the Delta Attack, is it?
Yeah,
no, that's our high rise. Yeah. I like the articulating at the end of the branch. Acron turbojets I've used a lot of in the past, and there's a couple of AWG branches I'm a fan of.
I guess, Pete, what I was driving at is, if you were going to go for the 45 with the greater frictional loss compared to the 51, 52, would you go for smooth bore?
You want to increase the flow rate at the branch,
Yeah. So, which was my thing about the 38 was, I could see that, but I would use.
That's why I prefer some of the high-rise branches, like the Delta Attack or something like that, because they're higher flow.
Yeah,
that'd be my move, I think.
And to be honest with you, because I'm not particularly hung up in the whole pulse thing, not that I've said it to you before, there was nothing wrong with Rasander and Giselson's method. We just didn't adopt it, in the way we should have done. Yeah. But I am very cognizant of the Dutch and some Canadian research as well, where it's showing that the straight stream is much easier to achieve than a very effective pulse.
Yeah, your likelihood of success with pulsing, you're throwing knives in the dark. Yeah, really, you don't know what you're hitting.
Which for me then is sort of why is there an argument to say that actually we should be defaulting to smooth bore for interior attack?
Yeah, just drop it.
Which goes back to, you actually only need a relatively small number of control measure tactics, and just be really good at the ones that we adopt. And actually then going back to what you actually do when you go in, at least then having something that firefighters, for the most part, say, we actually do that. We've got confidence. And
also, it requires very little long-term practicing and embedding that habit, because gas calling is a wide spectrum of how good or bad it is, and how effective you are with it, and how dexterous, whatever the word is, how dexterous you are when you're using it. I don't think dexterous is a word. Whereas straight bore is it's much more idiot proof. I could teach my daughter to do it, and she's not an idiot, but it's just because we go to less fires, and we've got so much more skill sets with fire and rescue now. Everyone needs to practice their rope and their swift water rescue and bloody animal rescue and bariatrics. We need to. That's why sometimes I like leaning into some of the non-negotiables of John McDonough and people like that. But there's always the perhaps argument that you get into with so many variations of incidents and situations.
Look, I think you've heard me say this before, Pete, and I always make the point when I say this that it's not meant in any way to sound derogatory, but it is your lowest common denominator here. It's your, it is particularly with our retained duty system firefighters that have very limited contact time available. If you've got 2 hours a week,
Massive passion, massive enthusiasm, very low training time, unfortunately.
and that's just a fact. It is in no
Yeah.
way is that in no way is that it to
Not a slight
as
on
you
their
say,
professionalism, it's just reality. Yeah.
you know, if there is a limited time as a commodity, that is not something that is they have in abundance. So let's maximise the control measure. Let's maximise that time focused on the best control measure tactics.
So here we go. Let me drag you into this rabbit hole for a second and humour me. You've got 14-week recruitment, okay? And what do we want to say? We've got how many weeks do we give to BA now? 4 weeks maximum?
I guess it would.
What are you going to teach that person? I'll give you pumps and BA, because I also argue there's a lot of firefighting tactics that should be taught in the core skills modules of pumping and things like that. What would you spend the majority of your time doing? So if we talk about hose management versus thermography versus internal search procedures versus, I know it's a horrible question and we're only going to go here for a minute, but where would you spend the time training that firefighter? What skills would you want them to get proficient at before you let them loose?
One of the first things I would focus on, because I believe that I do not believe it gets anything like the focus that it should nowadays, is pump operation.
Yeah.
Like that is, and I appreciate now that there are many appliances, which is a great thing, have flow meters on the inlet and the outlets. But particularly those that don't, even something as simple as, does a pump operator understand that by reading the compound gauge, you can understand what pressure you're getting in from your hydrant? Even if you don't know what flow you're getting, you can at least start, there are calculations you can then employ to start working some of that stuff out. So I do think that there are, and even things like frictional loss, and static head, those things, because I think for me, one of the questions that I asked as chief was, just reassure me, we are to the tactical firefighting department, we are teaching firefighters to put fires out. Just reassure me we are actually doing that. You know what I mean? That is part of what we're teaching them.
Yeah.
Because you're not doing it in your BA course, you know what I mean? And you're not doing it on your CFBT either. You're not teaching them to put fires out.
And you're not doing it on your pumps course.
You know what I mean? So I just want some reassurance that we are actually training fireys to put fires out.
How do we confirm that, though? And again, this is a big why question, because training resources, synthetic smoke rigs, people saying, I don't want to expose my recruits to unnecessary contamination, so we don't take them to any live burns as part of their training unless they go to the college. They will still get an exposure to live fire there, or they go to Manchester, Merseyside, Lancashire, West Mids. There's some great services, and I'm sure there's lots of others that still do incorporate live burns. A lot do not. A lot of very well-funded ones do not. Simply they don't have an appetite for it. It's not that they don't have the space or the funding.
But even, Pete,
to...
even in some of those services that you mentioned, the rigs that they have still only facilitate, at best, probably a 2 megawatt heat release rate fire. Which,
I know, but at least they're going to put a fire out.
Well, you say that.
Argument. I agree.
You say that, Pete. You say
Go on,
that.
push back.
But actually, how many of them actually get to put the fire out? Because,
yes, yeah,
this was the point I was making sort of in that report around some of the training is almost that we are consolidating the default by using 19mm hose reels on your live fire training. And the response from the instructors was, yeah, but if we use 45s, we'll put the fire out. And it'd be like, that's sort of my point. that's sort of the point I'm making, isn't it? You know what I mean? By using 19 mil, you're not putting the fire out. You know, now I know that's it's about progression, you know, flow and move progression. But that's why.
I know, and we're teaching them how to optimize fire conditions because we don't want them to put it out too much because it needs to be ready for the next team that's stood outside.
And look, I understand all those limits. That's why if you look at the last 2 inspection reports, I've strongly advocated the creation of something akin to what the Dutch use at 20 Airport, is that 20-metre corridor with the firebox at the right angle.
Yeah.
Where they can progress, you know, they're burning around an 8 megawatt heat release rate fire because they're burning mattresses and blocks of foam and such like. So the full extent of the heat flux is not directed to the firefighters because the firebox is on the right angle. So the wall that directly faces the heat box, that's going to be absorbing substantial amounts of the heat.
It's going to be bouncing,
but there will still be some deflection of that, you know, back into the corridor. But what it allows the firefighters to do, using the arc method and using low pressure, high flow, so there's a hose management requirement there at least. So whilst the number 1 might be the nozzle firefighter, the number 2 is absolutely doing hose management. And because of the heat release rates, they are down on the knees. They're not going to be standing up because it would be much too hot for them to do that. You know what I mean? Even with achieving some cooling with the arc method. Yes, they're not going to put the fire out, but at least it allows them to progress.
Yeah.
And you could put furniture in there. You could create obstructions that they would have to then manoeuvre their way around.
Some places like, in fact, I won't mention the service, but there's some places where they'll have 4 or 5 attack boxes or demo boxes, very different demo boxes they are. And they use them for firefighting tactics and all sometimes trying to, you know, do flow path and stuff. I'm like, I know that you think it would reduce your capacity, but put all 4 of them together in a line. Do you know what I mean? And then create a partition, which a lot of them have got in anyway, so that you could put a fire behind a partition in the 4th one, and you're almost creating that corridor in itself anyway. And you could even partition off different ones and see the flow paths through each of the... but there was a massive purchase, and I feel like we're still...
They were.
Yeah.
We
still keep buying demo boxes.
Yeah. You know, demo
boxes...
is a demo, but it's for the purposes of demonstration. You know what I mean? It's not an attack box, is it? And I've said this ad nauseum.
Demonstrate incipient fire growth flashover. Demonstrate the effect of it on PPE, and you can see pyrolysis and fire growth, and then you can talk a little bit about vertical ventilation, and you can, you know, it's for demonstration purposes.
Absolutely, and also it's a fixed fire load. It's a fuel controlled fire, and it's a bidirectional flow.
It's usually got a massive vent. There's a big opening at the end of the container. You ain't going to get a curtain over that.
So it is so far from the reality.
Yeah.
And this is
fun. It's impressive.
And often when they're used for the purposes of attack, essentially you've got your student, your branch firefighter is going to be static, might do a left, centre, right, left, centre, right, and then move on. They're not even moved.
Yeah.
Which is why I go back.
But also you're training them that you can see the fire and you're not putting it out. Put the fire out. Well, it's in front of you. Put it out.
And that's the thing. I'm not really sure what value there is in that. Because, you know, when I'm asking them what you'd actually do when you go in, you know, and relative to what was your training. Well, yeah, my training was to like pulse, shut down, move, pulse. Now just pulse, which is static, you know what I mean? Which I understand because I understand the limitations of the demonstration unit. But even where they've been creative and tried to create at least a partial attack scenario, it's not really attack, it's progression, it's not attack because you're not putting the fire out. I mean,
no.
Look, we and I get the limitations. I do really understand that, but and that Dutch option still would only be progression. It still wouldn't be extinguishment, but at least you'd be progressing in more real world, with a greater heat release rate and the ability to use an arc over a greater distance, and at least see that you could use the length of your stream to create substantial cooling, with
And
a
the
real
tactics
world
and
heat
physical
release rate.
requirements for effective advancement with a 45 down a long corridor, and how the tactics you need to adopt for that.
Exactly.
Because I think that, that has people, that had me on its knees first time I did it. It's bloody hard.
Yeah, there you go. And that is real world training exposure, which then to me has a value. Because to be honest with you, Pete, I'd be more inclined to use the ULFSRI water mapping air entrainment rig, the Perspex sort of the rig that they built, because at least you can see where the water's going, and you can see how much air's getting entrained, as you're utilising your stream. There would be some good value in that, because at least the firefighter then is able to visualise, right? Because if you do that on the main branch versus a hose reel, then you'll see the difference. You'll see a real difference about how much water there's actually getting. And then if you conceptualise that with, you think about like a proper, you will have been in fires, as I have, where I've gone in and got to the point where I thought, no way, I can't progress any further. This is, and had to rapidly extricate.
I had one in a carpet shop in the first few years of my career, and I'd navigated down this very narrow corridor until I realised that there were all the carpets stacked either side of me. And when I looked back from my BA partner, the carpets had started leaning in. And I always have that flashback image in my head. And I'm like, if I was just kept going gung-ho, they'd have just slowly arced in behind me. And I'd have been stuck behind all them carpets, and it was getting really hot really, really fast. But I was just so tunnel vision back then.
Yeah, and that would have been a load of fuel behind you.
Oh, geez, that was just, that's got, feelings of Manchester in my head. Horrible scenarios for people. So you said about a greater focus on pumping. Sorry, just drag you back there for a second. What would we teach in terms of BA?
So I think, in respect of BA, I think the National Ops Guard, from duties of the wearer right the way through to BA sector. I think that and so if there's all of that stuff, and then there's directional and compartment clearance. If you like, I think you've got to teach that, but I think it needs to be clear that this is post-suppression isolation when you'll be doing that. And actually, in that scenario, you would be ventilating as you went, which is where you might use the BA shuffle, because you're not going to use it you're definitely not doing that if you're advancing in to do an attack, because you're not going to stand up, are you? You know what I mean? This is Lars' point, what you'd be stood up doing. That's the opposite of what we're actually. So I think it's all about scenario and the firefighters understanding the circumstances and when you do. And I don't think you necessarily need real fire for that. I think you can probably create heat and humidity in other ways and use artificial smoke, for firefighters to practice that search procedure, because I think it's important that we do that, but I think it's also important that it's with the understanding, that very much the NFPA 1700 sort of methodology, that whilst saving life will always be the first strategic priority, the first tactical priority will be to put the fire out. So BA Team Alpha 1 will always be the attack team. It will always be the attack team. And Alpha 2 might be a hose management team. But then anything beyond that then Alpha 3, then you might be into some of more of the BA. Do you see what I mean? You would be very, very clear that we're always going to do. And if there's only one fire engine in attendance, then you are Alpha 1. Then you will attack the fire, you will isolate, you will suppress, you will isolate, and then you will close the door, and then you will search.
Mm-hmm.
And then you will apply, because at that point you can then start to ventilate, but because you'll have managed the hazard. I know that's a real binary oversimplification.
It's a combine harvester analogy, isn't it? I always love that analogy. It works so nicely. I think, you can't search very well where you've got this thing creating further hazard. It's not an efficient way of going about it.
Even if you found someone, what would you do? Bring them back out through the hazard and probably more than likely kill them by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't. There are incidents that we will both be well aware of in the past. Where firefighters have gone in, can't question the bravery, but have made no attempt to tackle the fire and instead have gone to try and rescue people. When in reality, they might well have dragged them out, but they might well have killed them by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Because they haven't controlled
Includes
the
in the
hazard.
name, your firefighters. Fire and rescue. Firefighters.
Yeah.
Go and fight the fire.
Yeah, well, manage the hazard. Control the hazard first. It's and then create, because if it benefits the firefighters, it's going to benefit trapped occupants as well, isn't it?
If you're a regular listener to the podcast, then chances are you are big into your own personal development and the development of firefighters around you. So I wanted to remind you of our mobile app Drillbook. This is a free training and development resources made by firefighters for firefighters. Heading on to Drillbook, you will find incident debriefs, radio messages, notes and lines, quick reference guides, quizzes every single day. We've got useful links to the ERG, to Web Rescue, to Jessup, Euro Rescue, 10-second triage, National Operational Guidance, and not to mention our daily quizzes where you will find questions on extrication, casualty handling, breathing apparatus, fire development, water rescue, rope rescue, you name it. It is the go-to resource if you've got a spare 5 minutes on the firehouse to develop yourself and those around you. Not only that, if you're looking to get into the fire service, we've got advice on there on interview questions, interview answers. You can build your own questioning in there. And again, remember, this is built by firefighters for firefighters, so you can add your own drills in there. You can pick the drills that you find the most favorite. There is literally hundreds of training ideas, hundreds of drills in there. Remember, this app is absolutely free and it grows every single day down to the contributions of our thousands and thousands of users. It's freely available on Android, Apple, and you will find it in the links for this podcast. Remember, it's called personal development. The clue's in the name. You've got to work twice as hard on yourself as you do on the job. So always be growing, always be developing. Now let's get back to the show. What's your thoughts on real side angle here? The American approach with truckies searching ahead of the branch, practicing anti-ventilation, finding the location of the fire, shutting it down. I was, who was I speaking with the other day? Alan from, I forget what service he's in. Sorry, Alan Smith. Where they used to go in without attack lines, without branches, just to try and locate the fire, shut it down. We wouldn't think of putting anybody in without firefighting media now.
No, and there was a fairly recent example from Miami-Dade where it was a single story unit with a person's report, but with the occupant was in a bedroom behind a closed door opposite to the room of origin, which was well alight. Mm-hmm. And they were talking about the different tactical options, and one of them was that they would have it was the search and the whatever the truck company or whatever they were calling them. So it wasn't the engine company, it wasn't the hose, it wasn't the attack team, would have gone in and done exactly that. And they'd said they'd have used what I envisaged might have been something like a ceiling hook to use the reach of that to close the door of the fire compartment. Now, if you think about it, that's probably what Braidwood was advocating. Because Braidwood was the first chief officer to advocate interior attack. And back then, they never had 52 mil low pressure, high flow back then, did they? I'm not sure. I'm not actually sure what they had, but whatever it was, I'm not sure it would have been anything like as effective as today. That's exactly what Braidwood was advocating. And I think it's having confidence in the science. So, would I fancy deploying in a BA team without an attack line first in, purely for the purposes of ventilation?
I would.
I'd give it a go, yeah, because I'd be down on... I'm 57 now, Pete. I'm not sure if I move quite in a ninja-like fashion as I once did, you know what I mean? Still train every day, man, so I might
Yeah, you'd be reading
be
the environment, though, so you'd be less exposed to risk because you'd be aware of what you're seeing.
Well, and that's, so would I have confidence that I would have a degree of understanding of the hazard to apply sufficient mitigation to not get myself into more trouble? I think I would. If I looked at the thing from the outside, I'd be trying to work out what is the interior location. You've got to think a lot of stuff through there, haven't you? Which shouldn't be beyond the wit of man to do that. Yeah, I'd give it a go. I think I probably would. And I think I'd give that a go. But then as a chief fire officer, am I going to advocate that as a control measure tactic?
No.
I don't know whether I am, because I guess what I'm going to think, what I'd probably, it's a bit like Stacker's question to me, why did you go for 52? Because it gives the highest flow rate, you know what I mean? What I'd probably, I'm almost going to contradict myself. I'm very attracted to a limited number of control measure tactics, just to keep it simple. And I suppose the challenge would be, Pete, what circumstances can you envisage where we would actually have to do that?
Very few circumstances where you'd have to do it, but I just think the speed of deployment and the potential benefits, because even if it is if it's a ventilated, visible flame from the outside, well, I can close the front door down, and if I see that reduces the exhaust, and I see a drop down in the exhaust gap, and I'm making an exterior attack as well. If I can get a crew in there and shut the door from the room of origin, I think of it similar, and it's a very loose thread, so just stay with me for a second. When we're talking about sending people above the bridgehead in high rises, and giving them a BA set but not putting them under air, and I'm like, go to a point where you feel safe and you're still in clean air, you're not, it's a piece of PPE if you then feel it's appropriate to put it on. So it's no difference than the incident commander. As soon as we get there, we have a full look around, but I still have a look inside. I don't leave the door open, but I'm going to have a look inside, and I personally will close the door. Should I do that if there's smoke issuing from the front door? I'm not wearing BA. What the hell am I doing approaching that? Because I've got to get some insight to increase my situational awareness. And I think I would increase my situational awareness by sending a team in.
Because on that initial size up, if you get right down on the floor whilst the door is open, cracked up, you're looking down. You may then see that door is open, and absolutely you think, do you know what? I'll just crawl in and shut that. You know what I mean? Completely. And again, it's one of the American tactics, isn't it? I get it. Yeah, absolutely. Clearly, the logic is there to support that. It is just that thing about. Yeah, but we would never commit anyone without water, and maybe there is a caveat there that is unless. But then you're then into, do we just really oversimplify it? A lot of it comes down to competence.
It is. You're resting that tactic on an assumed competence of foundational knowledge, which we can't. And it sounds so condescending and elitist. Oh yeah, Pete and Dan think they know the fucking everything. No, they don't. There's lots of things I don't know. A lot of things. Hence why I wanted to start the podcast. But yeah, you're having to place that on a foundation that you can't rely on.
You're back into lowest common denominator considerations, aren't you?
Yeah, unfortunately.
There is a thing that I guess where you're like, back into the defaults as like, well, like we've got 22 mil hose reels. They'll flow 200 litres. So yeah, I am going to Alpha 1 will go in, but they'll take that with them because it's more easy to deploy, and they'll go and take that with them to close the door, and then they'll come out again. You know, maybe a bit convoluted, but look, it's food for thought, Pete. It's worth a look, isn't it? You know what I mean? It comes back to the lowest common denominator thing, exactly as you just said. You know, the way you articulated that, but. Fundamentally, as a tactic, is it valid? Yeah, it's anti-ventilation, of course it is. Of course it is.
So there's lots more we could cover in this. There was a number of great recommendations right down at the bottom of the document. I wonder if it might be worth exploring some of those, unless there's anything else before we come to the recommendations that you want to delve into.
So I think what I would say is, I've reflected on those recommendations, and I've since done a second inspection in Mid and West Wales. And the view I took was there would be very limited utility in me making exactly the same recommendations again, even if all of the issues I'd identified were the same, and there were some points of difference in the operational assurance space. But fundamentally, in the firefighting tactics space, it was identical pretty much. You know, as you said right at the beginning, these issues are not unique to South Wales. These issues we will see to a greater or lesser extent across the country. So I think in terms of the recommendations, what I would say is the first three. The first one is talking about, I've made previous recommendations, they need to be acted on, because if they had have been, it would have gone some way to address some of these issues already. In relation to the second and third recommendations, basically what I'm saying is rewrite your guidance, produce quality, accurate, scientifically based hazard and control measure tactic doctrine. And the third recommendation is then reflect that in your training. It's all fairly standard. The rest talks about the operational assurance processes, which, to be honest, are probably unique to South Wales in that sense, and they might not read across necessarily to other services, depending on how they resource and other factors. You know, there'll be other issues at play in there. What I would say is, having reflected on this, the one thing I do think it's worth me sharing with you, and just for you, if nothing else, just to take a view on this, and it might stimulate some additional debate. If we go back to, right, when the first edition of the Incident Command Manual, we had, our last chat was in the space. When the first edition was published, and then second and third thereafter, if you remember, the principle of the declaration of a tactical mode was introduced. And the purpose of that, which may have been lost over time, was for the incident commander to record the outcome of their dynamic risk assessment. That was the purpose of the...
It's a justification as to why you've chosen a specific tactical approach. As to why you've put firefighters at more or less risk, which will help the thread back if it comes into legal action of, well, what was your logic behind doing that?
So if we look at typical messages through my analysis, and there's several hundred of them, and then another couple of hundred that I looked at in Mid and West. So they're very, very standard. You know, I mean, 2BA, hose reel offensive. Now, when Kevin Arbuthnot came up with, Kevin was the Dep in West Yorkshire. He was the author of the ICS manuals, top guy. When Kevin came up with that, right, I'm not really sure that's...
Is Kevin still alive?
Is what? Sorry,
you know if Kevin's still around?
Yeah. He's retired, but he's still there. He's still... I think
he'd be a great person to have a conversation with.
Bit of a blast from the past there, but what it struck me is, on a number of levels, which I will attempt to explain. If that first informative message declared the hazard and declared the control measure tactics along with the tactical mode, then that would provide value in a number of contexts, which I'll explain.
Mm-hmm.
But if first I give you a flavour of what that might look like, so let's say it's the informative message might be something like, identified hazard is the ground floor well alight.
Mm-hmm.
Control measure tactics are offensive exterior attack using a 45mm jet, transitioning to an offensive interior attack using a 45mm once suppression has been achieved for final extinguishment, offensive mode. Right?
Okay.
Now that's not too big a mouthful. That's not too big a mouthful.
And your justification for savable property or
that would
savable
serve a
life.
number of purposes, right? Firstly,
Yeah.
it would make the incident command, it would almost be a consolidation of the decision control process.
Mm-hmm.
It would be that, what is it you're doing, why you're doing it, what you think you're going to achieve. That you know, that sits between the situation plan and action domain. The thing sits in the middle. You know, the why, you know, what is it you think you're going to, what outcomes is it you think you're going to achieve. So it makes them think, right?
Mm-hmm.
For any tactical manager that's deployed for the purposes of active monitoring, it's a point of reference for them immediately. So if that is ground floor well alight, 2BA hose reel offensive interior attack, it's like, whoa, stop there.
Yeah.
Now, it might be too late to intervene because they might already have done it as the message is getting sent. But at least there's a possible opportunity to like, well, stop. What are you doing? Hose reel interior, but for a well alight? No. Mm-hmm. Which might in of itself stop the OIC.
Give me your justification as to why you have not attempted an exterior attack.
Well, why are you or if it's an offensive interior, it's got to be a main jet.
Yeah.
Why is it that the hose reels doesn't give you enough flow rate? Simplistic, but you get what I'm saying. And then the third aspect to it is that after the fact, when you're doing the incident review, you've got a clear, right, that's what you said the hazard was, that's what you said your control measure tactic was. It either marries up or it doesn't. Because after the fact, on the stop message, you know, you're going to get the full extent of the damage. Fire investigation report might show you how that's progressed and all the rest of it. There's an accountability there as well then for that action. And that's a recommendation I've made in the second inspection is about that. Because actually I think that has some value. As a fast time action, something that can be adopted straight away. And actually, that might, I'm not saying it's the panacea, Pete, but if a crew or a watch manager had to send a message like that, that might just make them think a bit more.
And also it would give more reliable data out the other end because it would force that decision, that accountability on that initial decision versus just parroting 2BA hose reel that's always been done.
Absolutely. Which isn't ever getting picked up on the ops assurance because it hasn't been.
No.
But then...
Yeah, I prefer that. Not prefer it, but it's like you say, it's quick and deployable. You know, asking people to rewrite all of their standard operating procedures is a big ask. But you do also, with respect, reference, you know, Chapter 10, the NFPA 1700 as a best practice. So, you know, these people haven't got to reinvent the wheel.
No. But if
not doing
as
it in
a watch
isolation.
manager yourself, you know, that it wouldn't be that difficult to adopt that.
You could just re-encourage it in all of the incident command re-accreditations, just as update training. You'd cover everybody in a year or two.
just put a directive out, across pan service directive, like from here on in, that's what you're informed.
Yeah.
You will state the hazard,
Yeah.
you will state the control measure tactic, and then you'll
Start doing your
declare-
assurance against it and start doing your revalidations against it.
Yeah.
Love that.
So that's one recommendation. And there was a couple of other recommendations were just around things like management of road risk because of the for ops assurance, because they're having to travel long distances. So make sure that there's always another officer that is notified to undertake active monitoring whilst the tactical manager is en route to the incident. So they only have to, they only have to think about driving.
There's some Manchester triggers in the head there, isn't there? In my personal head, anyway.
Is what? Sorry, Peter.
Trying to I was saying, for my personal head, there's some triggers of the Manchester Arena element within that because of the difficulties and travel times and who's in charge of stuff and eyes on it. Yeah.
It's hard enough trying to drive under blue lights at night, trying to navigate through, particularly in some of these areas of rural, very difficult country roads at the best of times. So it's a simple control measure. It was nothing more than that.
Mate, Wales is scary to drive as the cars keep getting bigger and the big brick walls keep getting narrower and people and little white vans coming along there at speed. It's I feel for officers, they're not cruising down a nice easy motorway.
That was my point. It's like you've got enough to worry about. Just getting there safe.
Taking calls from control and another tactical manager and somebody else. No.
Someone sat at home in the comfort of their own on cover, another officer notified them, right, spark up the mobilising system, put your radio on, start delving into the incident log, start to get a real in-depth understanding of that incident. When the tactical manager gets there, have a conversation with them on the phone as they're getting dressed.
Yeah,
getting the fire kit on.
This is everything I've been able to draw from the messages, from the message log. I've had a look at the site-specific risk information, whatever.
Absolutely.
Here's my brief from here. You go and get your on the ground.
You got absolutely right. These
reduce that cognitive load for that tactical manager, increasing their safety during a very, very mentally demanding drive. There's a reason that the driving courses are so long. It's a high-risk activity.
It's a management of road risk issue as much as anything, Pete. But again, I felt it was a useful recommendation to make because it would add to it. Hopefully, it would add to the safe system of work employed in for that particular activity, and there would be value from an operational assurance perspective as well. So, because that's really important is. We're not getting that many incidents, so the ones that we get, let's learn as much as we can from them. Let's draw out every single thing of value that we can to then feed that back in, to consider it and think, okay, procedurally, is our hazard knowledge right? Are the control measure tactics effective? If they are, is the equipment that we're providing optimal to deliver the best possible outcomes with that control measure tactic? It's all of those things, isn't it? Or, actually, that's all good. The execution wasn't where it should have been, which is then a training issue. So let's look at the training materials, let's look, because more often than not, people aren't going to deliberately do something wrong, you know what I mean? All right, there might be the odd occasion where people just do something completely mad, that there are human factors that just sometimes does happen. But more often than not, no one gets up in the morning and thinks, I know I'm going to go and do something completely insane today. I just don't think that happens. I really don't think that happens.
No, they're not.
So, it's that
100%.
thing about, okay, let's learn and let's be a true learning organisation. Let's do this in a way which, don't get me wrong, if someone's continually just not engaging and doesn't have the sort of attitude, that's a different matter. That's a different thing. But let's assume that everyone's motivated, wants to be there, gets up in the morning, thinks, I want to do good stuff today. Let's take that as our...
And I think we're there now more than ever because we are going through such retirement and hemorrhaging skill sets. I think people are hungry for that knowledge. They want to know and feel like they are really good at their job.
So,
I think there's a really growing appetite for a learning culture within the UK Fire and Rescue Service.
I've got to be honest with you, Pete, the station visits and the departmental visits I've done on these inspections, the engagement was superb. Absolutely superb.
Important to note.
First class. Really good engagement, very good professional discussion. And, you know, I come away thinking with a real positive thinking, these are great people. These want to do good stuff, you know what I mean? And in the leadership space,
it's just the accent that lets them down. I just can't understand a word half of them say in Wales, but never mind. I'm sure a Welsh person in a Merseyside, I'll tell you what, there's a joke in there somewhere.
Would be a reflection of everywhere, Pete. I think irrespective of the... And there might be the argument that they might need English subtitles listening to me, mightn't they? So, you know, in that sentence, I probably can't talk either. So, but the point I'm making is, you know, the engagement, absolutely superb. And, you know, you look at a lot of the people you have coming on the podcast. There's a whole raft of people out there now. You've got the likes of your Dave Berries up in Greater Manchester. You've got Louis and Lancs. You know, you've got Mike up in Scotland. There's a lot. Speaking to some guys from Kent, you know, really engaged. And
you know, I will say as well, Dominic Norcross, I'll just put a quick shout out for him, from Wales. He won the Incident Command title at the National BA Challenge. So they have got some, and he's not the only one at all, but he's a fantastic officer that operates out of there. Always very, very keen, and I'm sure he's one of many in Wales and across the country, as I know, who have got a real appetite for being very competent professionals at their job. And there was many learnings he took away from the National BA Challenge. He was far from perfect, but there was some very impressive individuals there, and they took away the Incident Command title for that. So absolutely love that conversation, brother. Thank you so much. Again, if people look underneath here, we'll put a link to the document we've been speaking about. So the inspection of South Wales Fire and Rescue Service to consider the effectiveness of its response to domestic dwelling fires. I sincerely hope we'll have a great number of more conversations as we continue down this learning cycle and try and pass on all this knowledge, brother. But really appreciate your time today, mate, as always. Send my love to the family.
All good, Pete. Great to talk. And maybe we'll have to get into the technical rescue space the next time, because we've done firefighting and incident command, haven't we now? So
you might have to lead me by the hand in that. It's been a little while since I've had me USAR stuff on, but there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in the technical rescue world. Certainly, we've had on the National Challenges Ian Greenman, lead of UCRO. I found that a fascinating conversation. We don't give enough to that. That's a bit of a self-awareness piece to me. I know I'm a bit of a romantic firefighter sometimes, but good call, brother. Right, I will speak to you soon. Love you lots. See you soon.
Oh God, cheers, Pete.
The Firefighters podcast was created to recognise, acknowledge, inspire, and hopefully even motivate these incredible individuals who have chosen to be part of the first responder community. Our driving purpose is to create a legacy resource for the current and future generations of firefighters and first responders. We get some incredible feedback from listeners and guests, and as the podcast grows, our desire to create longevity and sustainability means we are asking for the support of our listeners. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to get discounts to our merchandise, hoodies, clothing, coins, patches, tallies, and also access to all of the incredible documents get shared with us from our podcast guests and sector leaders, then please head over to our Patreon page, and for just £3 a month, you can support the future of the podcast. Please finally hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on the platform you're listening, and wherever you're around the world, please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.